This story is titled, When I Finally Visited My Parents After a Long Time, They Humiliated Me at Their Party, calling me stupid and lonely forever, while everyone mocked me, so I asked what if I simply stopped giving them money and cut off all financial support. Hey Reddit, my name is Daniel, and I'm 31 years old. I never thought I'd be sharing something like this online, but here we are. What I'm about to tell you unfolded over the course of about 6 years, and I want to be completely transparent about everything that happened. I've changed all the names for privacy reasons, but everything else is exactly how it went down. Fair warning though, this story gets pretty intense, and I went absolutely nuclear on the situation. To understand what happened, I need to paint you a picture of what growing up with my father Roberto was actually like. Imagine the most entitled, narcissistic person you've ever encountered in your life. Now multiply that personality by about 15, and you'll start to get close to who this man really was. This guy genuinely believed that the world owed him everything, while he contributed absolutely nothing of value to anyone around him. We lived in what most people would consider a decent middle-class house in Condesa. Me, my parents, and my 3 younger brothers Carlos, Luis, and Miguel. But here's the thing about my dad that made our home life a nightmare. He treated that house like it was his personal kingdom, and the rest of us were nothing more than his subjects who existed solely to serve his needs and inflate his ego. The man worked as a gardener, but only when he felt like it, which was maybe 4 days a week during a good month. Most of the time, he was too busy lounging around the house, watching television, and barking orders at everyone else. But what really gives you insight into his character was his coffee ritual. This dude had developed a coffee-making process so specific and demanding that it would have made a Starbucks barista walk out in frustration. Everything had to be perfect. The water temperature, his special mug, the exact timing. And he had absolutely zero tolerance for any mistakes. God help whoever screwed up his precious morning coffee routine. The real nightmare began with how he treated me compared to my brothers. You see, Carlos was the golden child in our household because he could crack jokes and kiss ass like a professional. Luis got praised for every single mediocre soccer play he made, as if he was destined for the national team. Miguel was the baby of the family, so naturally he could do absolutely no wrong in Dad's eyes. And me? I was designated as the family scapegoat from day one, and I mean that literally. From the time I was 8 years old, 8 fucking years old, this man was telling me I was worthless. Daniel, you're such a pendejo, he'd say on a regular basis. Look how quiet you are. What kind of man doesn't speak up for himself? You're going to be a loser your whole life if you keep acting like this. What kind of father looks at a 3rd grader and decides to systematically destroy his self-esteem? What kind of grown man tells a child that he's destined to be a failure? The psychological damage wasn't random or accidental. It was systematic and deliberate. While my brothers got bedtime stories and quality time with Dad, I got lectures about how disappointed he was in my very existence. While they received help with their homework and encouragement with their studies, I got criticized for not being able to figure everything out by myself. Real men don't need help, he'd tell me with this condescending smirk. Then he'd turn around and spend an entire hour patiently helping Luis with basic math problems that I'd already mastered years earlier. By the time I turned 13, I was essentially running the entire household. I was the one getting my younger brothers ready for school every morning, helping my mother with the grocery shopping, and making sure everyone's homework actually got completed. Meanwhile, Dad would come home from his part-time gardening job, when he bothered to show up for work, and immediately start barking orders like he'd just finished an 18-hour shift doing construction work. Daniel, why isn't dinner ready? Daniel, your brothers are being too loud, deal with them. Daniel, clean up this fucking mess right now. It never seemed to occur to him that I was just a kid too, trying to navigate my own life and responsibilities. I became his personal assistant and punching bag rolled into one. But the worst part wasn't even the constant labor I was expected to perform. The absolute worst part was how he would systematically undermine everything I accomplished. It didn't matter what I achieved or how hard I worked. He always found a way to twist it into evidence that I was somehow deficient as a person. Made honor roll at school? Big deal, according to him. Because school was easy, and I should just wait until the real world kicked my ass. Helped my mother with the household bills using money I'd earned from my part-time job? Stop trying to be the man of the house, he'd sneer. Because I was just a kid playing dress-up and embarrassing myself. Nothing I did would ever be good enough for this man, and he made sure I understood that on a daily basis. I remember one specific incident that happened when I was about 15 years old, and it perfectly encapsulates the kind of psychological torture this man put me through. I had been working weekends at a local electronics shop, saving up every peso I could manage to put aside. When Mother's Day came around, I wanted to do something special for my mom, so I took my hard-earned money and bought her a small bracelet from the local market. It wasn't expensive, just a simple, modest piece of jewelry. But I was incredibly proud of the fact that I had earned the money myself and chosen something I thought she would like. When my father saw the gift, he immediately snatched it away from me and started examining it like he was some kind of world-renowned jewelry expert. "This cheap garbage?" he said with absolute disgust in his voice. "You're embarrassing the entire family by giving your mother junk like this. What's she going to tell the neighbors when they see her wearing this plastic nonsense?" Then, right in front of me and my mother, he threw the bracelet directly into the trash can. My mother tried to fish it out later when he wasn't looking, but the damage had already been done. That was the day I truly learned that nothing I could ever do would be good enough for this man. High school was when things really went completely off the rails with his behavior. Every single achievement I managed to accomplish got twisted into some kind of proof that I was somehow deficient as a person. The dating situation during those years turned out to be particularly prophetic. Because guess what happened? Girls did leave, and they left partially because family dinners with my father were like visiting a maximum security prison. This dude would grill any girl I brought home like she was applying for a visa to enter the country, and then he'd make jokes about how she could obviously do so much better than me. I'll never forget the experience of bringing home my first serious girlfriend, Isabella, when I was 18 years old. She was smart, funny, and actually seemed to genuinely like me despite witnessing my family's complete dysfunction on multiple occasions. But my dad took one look at her and immediately launched into full interrogation mode, as if he was conducting some kind of formal interview process. "So, Isabella," he said with this fake friendly voice, "what does your father do for work?" When she politely answered that her father owned a small business, Dad nodded approvingly and said, "Oh, that's nice. Daniel here thinks he's going to be some big-shot entrepreneur too, but between you and me, he doesn't have what it takes to run anything. He's too soft, you know? I'm sure you've already noticed that about him." This was a grown man trying to convince an 18-year-old girl to dump his own son right in front of me during what was supposed to be a family dinner. Isabella lasted about 4 months before she couldn't handle the constant undermining anymore. "Your dad really seems to hate you," she told me right before she broke up with me. "It's actually kind of scary to watch how he treats you. I don't understand how a father could be so cruel to his own child." Meanwhile, my brothers were getting the red carpet treatment for literally just existing and breathing. Carlos would tell some stupid, unfunny joke, and Dad would crack up like it was the most brilliant piece of comedy he'd ever heard. Luis would score a goal in some random neighborhood soccer game, and you'd think he had just won the World Cup based on Dad's reaction. Miguel would bring home a C on a test, and Dad would beam with pride and say, "That's my boy. You're doing great. Keep it up." But here's where my father's psychological manipulation got really twisted and calculated. He started using my brothers as weapons against me, turning them into unwitting participants in his campaign to destroy my self-esteem. He would make constant comparisons designed to make me feel like I was the defective member of the family. "Why can't you be funny like Carlos?" he'd ask with this disappointed tone. "Why don't you play soccer like Luis? Even Miguel has more personality than you do, and he's just a kid." The really sick part was how he managed to pit us against each other without my brothers even realizing what was happening. He'd tell Carlos that I was jealous of his sense of humor and resented his ability to make people laugh. He'd tell Luis that I was bitter about his athletic ability and thought I was better than him because of my grades. He'd tell Miguel that I believed I was superior to everyone else in the family because I was older and more responsible. It was a classic divide and conquer strategy that kept us from bonding as brothers and prevented us from presenting a united front against his bullshit. I threw myself completely into school and work because those were the only places where I felt even remotely competent or valued as a person. I graduated near the top of my class and immediately got into HVAC work, where I managed to land a decent entry-level job right out of technical college. I was proud of what I had accomplished and thought that maybe, finally, I had found something that would earn my father's respect, or at least his acknowledgement that I wasn't a complete failure. None of it mattered to him, though. "HVAC work?" he said, with this dismissive snort when I told him about my new career path. That's not real work. Real men build things with their hands, not crawl around in attics all day fixing air conditioners. You're going to spend your whole pathetic life on your hands and knees in cramped spaces. This criticism was coming from a guy who couldn't hold down a steady gardening job and had never built anything more complicated than a sandwich in his entire life. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here I was, literally working with my hands every single day, installing complex heating and cooling systems, troubleshooting intricate mechanical problems, and performing actual skilled labor that required years of specialized training and certification. But because it wasn't the specific type of manual labor that he personally approved of, it somehow didn't count as real work. Meanwhile, this dude spent most of his days planted in front of the television, criticizing everyone else's work ethic while contributing absolutely nothing productive to society. The gaslighting was absolutely incredible too. He would say something completely vicious and cruel to me, and then when I got upset or tried to defend myself, suddenly I was being too sensitive and couldn't take a joke. According to him, I was the problem for having feelings about being constantly attacked and belittled by my own father. By the time I turned 26, I had worked my way up to HVAC supervisor at a solid mid-sized company located in San Pedro. I had a good salary, decent benefits, and I actually felt proud of what I had accomplished in my career. I was respected by my colleagues, trusted by my clients, and building a reputation as someone who could get complex jobs done on time and under budget. That's when I made what turned out to be the biggest mistake of my entire life. I decided to move back home temporarily to help with family expenses. Work was actually pretty rewarding during this period of my life. I was specializing in commercial installations, office buildings, retail spaces, small factories, and there was something genuinely satisfying about designing an HVAC system from scratch and seeing it come together perfectly. I was good at what I did too, and I had developed a solid reputation in the industry for getting complex jobs completed efficiently and professionally. The reason I moved back home was because my father's work situation had gotten significantly worse over the years. He was barely bringing in any income at all and had started blaming everyone else for his problems instead of taking any personal responsibility. The economy's rigged against honest workers, he'd complained constantly. All these foreigners are taking the good jobs away from people like me. It was classic victim mentality, always someone else's fault, never his own lack of effort or professionalism. My mother's arthritis had been getting progressively worse, which meant she couldn't do as much sewing work as she used to, and that was one of the few sources of income our household had. Bills were piling up, the house was literally falling apart, and my three brothers were all focused on their own lives and responsibilities. So naturally, I stepped in like the responsible oldest son I had always been forced to be, and I started covering all the major household expenses. I'm talking about everything: the mortgage payments, electricity, water, gas, car payments, groceries, you name it. I was basically funding the entire household's existence while working 55-hour weeks at my demanding job. But here's the really sick part. My father took full credit for being the provider and breadwinner of the family. He would tell neighbors and friends about his house and his bills like he was some successful patriarch who had built this comfortable middle-class lifestyle through his own hard work and determination. Instead of acknowledging that he was essentially a deadbeat living off his son's income, he acted like some kind of successful family man. The neighbors probably thought he was doing well financially, but behind the curtain, it was me working myself to exhaustion while he played the role of the respected father and husband. The entitlement was absolutely unreal. Not only did he expect me to pay for everything without any gratitude, but he acted like I owed him even more than I was already providing. "Daniel, the cable bill went up. You need to cover the difference," he would tell me, not ask me. He wasn't making requests. He was issuing commands like I was his personal ATM instead of his son, who was doing him a massive favor by keeping him from being homeless. But here's the really sick and twisted part of this whole arrangement. The more I helped financially, the more he resented my presence in the house. Every bill I paid was apparently proof that he was losing control of his household. So instead of the abuse getting better, it actually got worse. "Look at Daniel. Thinks he runs this house now," he would say with this bitter, sarcastic tone whenever I paid a bill or handled a household responsibility. "Thinks his money makes him better than his old man." This was his reaction to me, literally keeping him from being homeless, and it perfectly encapsulated the level of twisted logic I was dealing with on a daily basis. The financial control became another weapon in his psychological arsenal against me. He would make expensive purchases without consulting anyone in the family, then expect me to cover the shortfall when the bills came due. A new television that we didn't need, expensive groceries that were way beyond our normal budget, repairs for things that weren't actually broken, anything he could think of to assert his dominance and remind me that he was still the man of the house, even though I was paying for absolutely everything. The dating situation became completely impossible around this time in my life. How do you explain to someone that you're 29 years old, successful in your career, but living with your parents because you're supporting them financially? And even if I managed to get past that awkward conversation, my father would still sabotage any relationship I tried to build, just like he had done when I was younger. I remember one girl I really liked came over for dinner during this period. She was sweet, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me better. But my dad spent the entire evening making passive-aggressive comments about how I was married to my job and would probably end up dying alone like my grandfather had. She never called me back after that dinner, and I couldn't blame her for running away from that level of dysfunction. But the absolute worst part of this whole financial arrangement came when my father's truck finally broke down. This piece of junk vehicle had been held together with duct tape and prayers for the last 6 years, and anyone with half a brain could see that it was on its last legs. The engine leaked more oil than it actually burned. The transmission slipped so badly that it was basically decorative, and the electrical system was so completely screwed up that half the lights didn't work at any given time. Any reasonable person would have put this truck out of its misery years earlier, but my dad kept driving it because, according to him, real men fix their own vehicles. Of course, fixing, in my father's vocabulary, meant ignoring problems until they became catastrophic, then blaming everyone else when the inevitable breakdown finally happened. The truck situation was actually hilarious in retrospect, if you can find humor in such dysfunction. This beat-up Ford pickup had been a rolling disaster for years, and my dad's approach to maintenance was to pretend that problems didn't exist until they literally couldn't be ignored anymore. The final straw came when the engine literally caught fire while he was driving to one of his rare landscaping jobs. The fire department had to come put it out. A tow truck hauled the burned-out shell to the scrapyard, and suddenly my father was stranded without any transportation. So like the complete idiot I was at the time, I gave him 210,000 pesos for a down payment on a used pickup truck. And then I co-signed the loan for another 140,000 pesos. We're talking about a total of 350,000 pesos to get this man back on the road so he could continue his sporadic work schedule. Did he thank me for this enormous financial favor? Hell no. He acted like I owed him a vehicle, because that's what sons are supposed to do for their fathers, according to his twisted worldview. I still have all the WhatsApp messages from that time period, and they're absolutely perfect evidence of his manipulation tactics. He spent weeks begging me to help out the family, promising that he would pay me back as soon as things got better, and talking about how this was just a temporary situation until he could get back on his feet financially. Every single word was a lie, but I kept screenshots of all of it because something in my gut told me I might need that evidence someday. My father's behavior at family gatherings during this period became absolutely unbearable to witness. Every wedding, birthday party, quinceañera, or holiday celebration was an opportunity for him to publicly humiliate me while playing the concerned father act for everyone else in attendance. "Daniel's 31 now and still doesn't have a girlfriend," he would announce to whatever group of relatives happened to be within earshot. "I keep telling him he needs to get out more and socialize, but he's always working. I worry about him ending up alone, you know?" He would say this with this fake, sympathetic voice that fooled most people. But his eyes were practically gleaming with satisfaction every time he managed to embarrass me in front of extended family. The worst incident happened when my cousin got engaged, and my dad stood up during the toast and said, "It's great to see young people finding love and building families. Some people are just natural at relationships, while others..." Then, he looked directly at me and shrugged like I was some hopeless case that everyone should pity. The engagement party was particularly brutal because my father had been drinking, and whatever filter he normally had was completely gone for the evening. He spent the entire event making loud observations about everyone's relationships while pointedly excluding me from any positive comments whatsoever. "Look at Roberto over there. He found himself a beautiful wife," he would say loud enough for half the party to hear. "And Carlos there already has 2 kids, really building a real legacy for himself. Even young Miguel has a girlfriend now, and he's barely out of high school." Then he would pause dramatically and scan the room with his eyes until they landed squarely on me, and he'd deliver the killing blow. Some people are just built different, I guess. Not everyone's cut out for family life. The implication was crystal clear to everyone in the room, and the awkward silences that followed were absolutely deafening. You could literally feel the discomfort radiating from other family members who didn't know how to respond to such blatant cruelty. My brothers started joining in on the mockery too, probably because they could see that my father rewarded that kind of behavior toward me. Daniel's married to his multimeter became their running joke whenever the topic of relationships came up. Daniel's so boring he probably talks to HVAC units instead of people. Real comedy gold there, guys. These were grown men participating in psychological abuse because they wanted to stay in daddy's good graces. Fortunately, my cousin Elena was one of the few people in our extended family who could see through this complete garbage. She had moved to Puebla for university and rarely came back for family gatherings. But when she did attend these events, she would always pull me aside afterward to check on me. "Daniel, you know that none of what he says is true, right?" She told me after one particularly brutal Christmas gathering where my father had been especially vicious. "You're the most responsible person in this whole family, and everyone knows it, even if they won't admit it out loud," Elena continued during that conversation. She was different from the rest of our relatives because she would actually call my father out when he got too nasty, even when she was just a kid. "Uncle Roberto, that's mean," she would say when he would start in on me during family gatherings. Most of the adults would just laugh along or stay quiet, but Elena never let it slide. "Honestly, Daniel," she said during one of our private conversations, "I don't know how you put up with it year after year. If someone talked to me the way he talks to you, I'd be gone so fast it would make their head spin. This fucking guy thinks he's some kind of king when he's really just a freeloader with delusions of grandeur." I appreciated her support more than I could express. But back then, I still believed that family meant putting up with whatever garbage they dished out, no matter how toxic or damaging it was. I wish I had listened to Elena's advice much sooner than I did. The breaking point had been building for months before that final dinner explosion, and I could feel my mental health deteriorating rapidly. I had started having actual panic attacks before family gatherings, literally dreading the thought of spending time with people who were supposed to love and support me. My work performance was beginning to suffer because I was constantly stressed about money and family drama, and I felt like I was living solely to serve other people's needs while my own life completely fell apart around me. The situation finally imploded when my Aunt Carmen decided to throw this massive family reunion at her house in Escobedo. I'm talking about more than 40 people crammed into her house. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, the whole extended family circus. Everyone was bringing their wives, husbands, kids, and even the teenagers were showing up with their boyfriends and girlfriends to show off their relationships. I showed up alone, obviously, and my father immediately started in with his greatest hits collection of insults and humiliation. "Even 16-year-old Lucas has a girlfriend tonight," he announced loudly enough for half the party to hear. "Daniel, you're really setting the bar low here, even for yourself." This comment was made in front of my teenage cousin, by the way, who looked absolutely mortified that he was being used as ammunition against me in my father's psychological warfare. But Dad was just getting warmed up for the main event. Throughout the entire evening, he kept making these loud observations designed specifically to draw attention to my single status and make me feel like a complete failure. "Wow, look at all these happy couples everywhere," he would say with fake amazement. "Daniel, you must feel like a third wheel at your own family gathering. That's gotta be rough, man." The really sick part was how he delivered these comments with this fake sympathetic voice, like he was genuinely concerned about my well-being instead of systematically destroying my self-esteem in front of everyone I had ever cared about. What made the whole situation even worse was watching other family members' reactions to his behavior. Some people looked visibly uncomfortable but didn't say anything to stop him. Others actually seemed to be enjoying the show, like my father's cruelty was some form of entertainment for them. A few relatives even chimed in with their own observations about my perpetual single status, piling on because they thought it was funny or acceptable. Dinner time finally arrived, and Aunt Carmen suggested that everyone should make a toast. You know, standard family gathering stuff where people talk about their blessings, their kids, their accomplishments, and how grateful they are for family. I was sitting there hoping this whole nightmare would wrap up soon so I could go home and recover from another evening of public humiliation and psychological abuse. Then my father stood up with his glass in his hand, and I immediately knew in my gut that something terrible was about to happen. I could see it in his eyes, that look of anticipation he got when he was about to deliver a particularly devastating blow to my psyche. He started with the usual family is everything nonsense that people always spout at these gatherings, talking about how blessed he was to have sons who had made something of themselves and built real lives with meaning and purpose. I could feel my stomach churning as he spoke because I knew exactly where this was heading, and there was nothing I could do to stop the train wreck that was about to happen. Then he pivoted to deliver the kill shot that would change everything between us forever. "But I have to ask Daniel, my eldest son," he said, his voice carrying across the entire room so that every single person could hear what was coming next. "Tell me something. What does it feel like to be a complete failure without a wife and without children? Look at yourself, 31 years old and still pathetically alone. Even the children sitting at this table have more of a life than you do." The entire room absolutely exploded with laughter. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone was cracking up like it was the funniest thing they had ever heard in their lives. My brothers were losing their minds laughing, doubling over like my father had just delivered the punchline of the century. Even some of the kids started giggling because all the adults were reacting like this was hilarious entertainment instead of watching a father systematically destroy his son's dignity in public. My mother was staring down at her plate like she wanted to disappear into the floor and never resurface. The few people who weren't actively laughing looked visibly uncomfortable, but absolutely nobody, and I mean nobody, told my father to knock it off or pointed out how inappropriate his behavior was. Not a single person in that room stood up for me or called out the cruelty they were witnessing. I sat there feeling like I was going to throw up, watching my entire extended family enjoy my complete and total public humiliation. My father just stood there with this triumphant smirk on his face, clearly savoring every second of my pain and embarrassment. He was waiting for me to take it quietly like I always had before, to just sit there and absorb the abuse like the good little punching bag I had been trained to be for the past 31 years. That moment seemed to stretch out forever in my memory. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, could feel every single pair of eyes in the room focused on me, waiting to see how I would react to being completely destroyed in front of everyone I had grown up with. The laughter was still echoing around the room, and I realized that this was my defining moment. I could either continue being their victim, or I could finally fight back. That's when something inside me finally snapped after 3 decades of abuse. I stood up so fast that my chair fell over backward and hit the floor with a loud crash. The laughter died immediately because everyone could see that I wasn't playing along with their sick game this time. There was something different in my posture, something in my expression that told them this wasn't going to go the way it usually did. I grabbed my glass, held it up in the air, and said the words that felt like molten lava pouring out of my mouth. "You know what, Dad? I'm going to make a toast too." My voice was steady and clear, carrying across the silent room. I toast to not being a fucking freeloader. The silence was so complete, you could have heard a pin drop anywhere in that house. I could see the confusion spreading across people's faces as they tried to process what I had just said, because apparently none of them had any idea that I was bankrolling my parents' entire lifestyle and had been for years. "Tell me something," I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word. "What does it feel like to be a 62-year-old man who can't pay his own bills? What does it feel like knowing that this failure sitting right here is the only reason you're not living under a bridge somewhere? And what does it feel like knowing that this failure is about to stop paying for your worthless existence?" The transformation on my father's face was incredible to watch. He went from smug and triumphant to confused to absolutely furious in about 3 seconds flat. Everyone else just sat there with their mouths hanging open, trying to process the bomb I had just dropped on the entire gathering. The golden boy, the family scapegoat, the quiet one who never fought back, had just revealed that he was the one keeping the patriarch financially afloat. "How dare you talk to me like that? I'm your father, you little—" He started screaming, but his voice was shaking now because he knew exactly what I was threatening to do, and he understood the implications better than anyone else in that room. "Father?" I shot back, my voice cutting through his attempted intimidation. "You've been my financial dependent for 6 years. Respect is earned, and you've done nothing but take my money while treating me like garbage. Well, guess what? The Bank of Daniel is officially closed for business." I grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair and looked around the table at all these people who had just been laughing at me and treating my humiliation like it was entertainment for their evening. "Enjoy figuring out how to keep a roof over your heads without this failure's help," I told them. And then I walked out of that house feeling like the most liberated human being on the planet. The drive home was absolutely surreal. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt actually free. No more walking on eggshells around my father's explosive temper. No more financial stress from supporting ungrateful people who treated me like garbage. No more pretending that being someone's verbal punching bag was somehow noble or necessary because of family obligations. The next morning, I did exactly what I had promised I would do the night before. I went online and canceled every single automatic payment that was coming out of my bank account. Mortgage, electricity, water, gas, internet, car insurance. Everything that had been keeping my parents' household functioning was now their problem to figure out. But I wasn't done with my revenge plan, not by a long shot. I pulled up all those WhatsApp messages from when my father had borrowed the 350,000 pesos for his truck, carefully screenshotting every single conversation where he had begged me for help and promised to pay me back. I had messages where he talked about how grateful he was for my assistance, how this was just temporary until he could get back on his feet financially, and how he would definitely repay me as soon as things got better. Then I sat down and drafted a formal demand letter requesting immediate repayment of the entire loan with reasonable interest calculated according to the national bank rates. I sent it certified mail with return receipt requested, making sure everything was professional, legally binding, and absolutely devastating to receive. I knew he didn't have 350,000 pesos just lying around somewhere, which was exactly the point I was trying to make. The whole situation gets really interesting about 3 weeks later when I received a phone call from my cousin Elena. It turns out that my father had been calling various extended family members and spinning this elaborate story about how I had suddenly turned against the family and was trying to destroy them out of pure jealousy and spite. According to his version of events, I was bitter about my brother's happiness and success, and I had decided to take out my frustrations on him and my mother. He was telling people that he had been supporting me financially for years, and that I had suddenly decided to bite the hand that feeds me. The level of manipulation was absolutely incredible. He had completely flipped the script and made himself out to be the victim of an ungrateful son who had lost his mind and turned evil for no reason whatsoever. Elena called me because she had talked to Aunt Carmen and gotten the real story about what had actually happened at the family reunion. "Daniel, I had no idea you were supporting them financially," she told me during that phone conversation. "Uncle Roberto made it sound like you were some kind of ungrateful leech who had been living off his generosity. I'm so sorry we believed his version of events without hearing your side of the story. Honestly, Daniel," she continued, "I always wondered how your uncle could afford that house and lifestyle on a part-time gardener's salary. Now it all makes perfect sense. This cabron was living off his own son while treating him like shit the entire time. What kind of father does something like that to his own child?" That conversation with Elena made me realize just how deep my father's manipulation and lies had gone over the years. He hadn't just been abusing me at home behind closed doors. He had been systematically poisoning my reputation with our extended family for years, probably to cover up his own failures and inadequacies as a provider and father. The next few months were absolutely wild to experience. My father went through what I can only describe as the 5 stages of grief, except instead of reaching acceptance at the end, he just kept cycling back to anger, over and over again. He actually told people that I was just being dramatic and would come crawling back once I realized how much family really meant to me. This cabron genuinely believed that I was bluffing about cutting off the money and that I would eventually cave under the pressure. Reality hit him like a freight train when the first utilities shut-off notice arrived in their mailbox. That's when he moved into the bargaining phase of his grief process. Suddenly, I was getting voicemails about how family always forgives each other and how we could work this whole situation out like mature adults if I would just call him back. The voicemails were simultaneously pathetic and hilarious to listen to. "Daniel Mijo, I know we've had our differences over the years," he would say in this fake conciliatory voice. "But this whole situation is getting completely out of hand now. Your mother is worried sick about what's happening to our family. Just call me back so we can figure this out like adults and put this nonsense behind us." When I didn't respond to his attempts at reconciliation, he shifted gears completely and moved straight into pure rage mode. The voicemails got nasty extremely fast, and his true colors came shining through once again. "You're dead to me, Daniel," he screamed into my voicemail. "You think you're so smart with your fancy job and your money, but you're nothing without family. You're going to regret this decision for the rest of your miserable life, you ungrateful piece of shit." My brothers tried reaching out to me during this chaotic period, but their approach was basically the classic, both sides are wrong, let's all just get along mentality that people use when they don't want to deal with uncomfortable family drama. Easy thing to say when you weren't the one who had been getting used and abused for decades while keeping everyone financially afloat through your own hard work. Carlos was absolutely the worst of my brothers in terms of his response to the situation. Remember him? He was my father's golden boy who could do no wrong in Daddy's eyes. About 4 weeks after I had cut off all the payments, he called me up with this incredibly self-righteous attitude that made my blood boil with rage. "Daniel, what the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded. "Dad's panicking now. Mom's crying every single day, and you've completely destroyed this family over what? Some stupid comment at a dinner party? This is insane behavior, even for you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing from him. Some stupid comment, Carlos? He's been treating me like garbage for 30 years while I paid for his entire lifestyle. Where the hell have you been during all of this? "Come on, man, that's just how Dad is," Carlos replied dismissively. "He doesn't mean anything by it. You know he loves you deep down. But this revenge thing you're doing, this is actually cruel. Mom could end up homeless because of your tantrum." A tantrum. This dude had the audacity to call 3 decades of financial and emotional abuse a tantrum that I was throwing like some kind of spoiled child. You know what, Carlos? If you're so concerned about Mom and Dad's financial situation, why don't you step up and start writing some checks yourself? I shot back at him. You've got a good job, you own a house, you're doing well for yourself. Start supporting them if you think it's so important. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to come up with some excuse for why he couldn't possibly do what I had been doing for 6 years. "It's not that simple, Daniel," he finally said. "I have my own family to think about now. Kids are expensive, the mortgage payments are brutal, and I've got my own financial responsibilities to worry about." "Stop right there," I interrupted him. "It wasn't simple for me either, but I did it for 6 fucking years while you all sat back and enjoyed the benefits. You want them taken care of? Take care of them yourself instead of guilting me into going back to being their personal ATM." But Carlos wasn't hearing any of it. In his mind, I was clearly the villain who had abandoned family when they needed me most, and nothing I could say was going to change that perception. "You're being incredibly selfish, Daniel. This isn't who you are, and this isn't how Mom raised us to treat family when they're struggling." And that's when I completely lost whatever remaining patience I had with this conversation. "Mom raised us? Dude, I helped raise you while Dad was calling me worthless every single day. I was making sure you had clean clothes for school and helping you with your homework while he was telling me I'd never amount to anything. You were the golden child who could do no wrong, and I was the insurance policy who paid for everything. Look, I get that Dad was hard on you sometimes, but," Carlos started to say. "Don't you dare give me that hard on you sometimes bullshit," I cut him off. "He systematically dismantled my self-esteem for 3 decades while you cheered him on and enjoyed the show." Another long pause filled the conversation, and when Carlos spoke again, his voice had turned cold and distant. "Fine, be that way if that's how you want to handle this situation. But when Mom ends up living in some crappy apartment because her son abandoned her in her time of need, that's going to be on you. I hope your pride and your need for revenge are worth destroying your own mother's life." "You know what's really on me, Carlos?" I replied. "Finally growing a spine and standing up for myself. That's something you might want to try someday instead of being Dad's ass-kissing coward for the rest of your life." I hung up on him and immediately blocked his number. I was done having conversations with people who were determined to make me the villain in this story. Then came my father's written response to my demand letter, and that's when I knew I had him exactly where I wanted him. His reply was absolutely pure gold from a legal standpoint. A handwritten letter that was full of rage and entitlement, but also incredibly damaging to any potential defense he might try to mount. "I don't owe you anything, you ungrateful brat," he had written in his sloppy handwriting. "That money was a gift to help family, and you can't just demand it back because you're having some kind of mental breakdown. I'm your father, and I don't have to pay you back for helping your own family. This is what sons do for their parents." The letter was absolutely perfect evidence for my case. Not only was he refusing to pay me back, but he was doing it in writing while completely contradicting his own WhatsApp messages where he had explicitly called it a loan and promised repayment multiple times. He had basically handed me a signed confession of his intent to defraud me. I took his letter, along with my screenshots of all the WhatsApp conversations, plus the bank records showing all the transfers I had made to him, and marched straight to a lawyer's office in Centro. I filed a civil lawsuit for 350,000 pesos plus interest, legal fees, and court costs in small claims court. Everything was documented, everything was provable, and I had him dead to rights. When he got served with the lawsuit papers, he went absolutely ballistic. I heard from neighbors that he was screaming about ungrateful sons and family betrayal while standing in his front yard, making a complete spectacle of himself for everyone on the block to witness. My mother's situation during all of this was genuinely heartbreaking to watch, and I'll admit that part of me felt terrible about the collateral damage she was experiencing. She kept calling me crying about how she didn't know what to do or how they were going to survive financially. Part of me felt horrible for her. But she had enabled my father's behavior for years and had chosen to stay silent while he systematically destroyed my emotional well-being. When I offered to help her leave him and start over somewhere else, she actually defended the guy who had been making both of our lives miserable. He's my husband, Daniel. Marriage means sticking together through hard times, for better or worse. That's what real commitment looks like. Yeah, well, being someone's son used to mean something too, I replied. But that didn't stop him from treating me like garbage for 31 years while I kept him from being homeless. Fast forward to now, 4 years after that life-changing dinner confrontation, and I'm not going to lie to you, life has been absolutely incredible beyond my wildest dreams. Remember how my father always said I would die alone and never find anyone who could love me? Well, he was completely wrong about that, just like he was wrong about everything else. I met Victoria at a work conference about 2 years ago, and she completely changed my life in ways I never thought possible. She's a financial advisor, brilliant, funny, and incredibly insightful about human behavior and relationships. And here's the thing that really blew my mind. When I told her about my dedication to family before I cut them off, she actually said it showed that I was loyal and responsible rather than weak or foolish. We clicked immediately from our very first conversation. There was something about her that made me feel comfortable, opening up in ways I had never been able to do with anyone else. We started dating seriously, and after 8 months of the most healthy, supportive relationship I had ever experienced in my life, we got married. The wedding was small, but absolutely perfect in every way that mattered to me. We kept it intimate with just her family and the few relatives of mine who had actually supported me through this whole nightmare with my father. We didn't invite the toxic people who had spent years watching my dad tear me down for their entertainment. Victoria is actually the person who helped me truly understand and recognize how toxic my family situation really was for most of my life. When I told her stories about growing up with my father and described what I thought was normal family dynamics, she looked at me like I was describing some kind of horror movie. "Daniel, that's not normal father-son behavior," she told me, with this mix of compassion and shock in her voice. "What you're describing is systematic psychological abuse. No child should ever have to endure that kind of treatment from a parent." Having someone validate what I had experienced for decades was incredibly healing in ways I hadn't expected. Elena flew in from Puebla to be at our wedding, and seeing her happy face in the crowd honestly meant more to me than having 100 fake relatives there who had spent years watching my father tear me down without ever standing up for me. During her speech at the reception, she said something that still gives me chills when I think about it. "I've watched Daniel carry his family on his shoulders for years while they treated him like he was the problem," she said to our small group of guests. "Now I get to watch him build something beautiful with someone who actually appreciates what an incredible man he is." Victoria's family welcomed me with open arms from day one, and the contrast between her family and mine was absolutely stark. Her father actually asks about my work because he's genuinely interested in what I do, not because he's looking for ammunition to tear me down later. Her mother includes me in family jokes and conversations without making me the punchline of every story. Her siblings treat me like an actual brother instead of a convenient target for their own insecurities and failings. My business absolutely took off during this period too. I left my company job and started my own HVAC contracting business, specializing in small businesses throughout Santa Catarina. It turns out that when you're not constantly stressed about family drama and financial manipulation, you can actually focus on building something amazing with your skills and expertise. We're pulling in more money than I ever imagined would be possible, and the business success felt like the ultimate vindication of everything I had been through. Here I was, the so-called failure son, who would never amount to anything according to my father, running a successful company with a growing client base and an excellent reputation in the industry. Every new contract I landed felt like another middle finger pointed directly at my father's decades of negativity and psychological abuse. Not only had I escaped his control and manipulation, but I was absolutely thriving without him in my life. Word got around our extended family about how well I was doing professionally and personally, which must have burned my father's ass even more than losing his financial support. Not only had I escaped his toxic influence, but I was building something incredible without any help from him whatsoever. My mother finally left my father about 18 months ago and moved in with me and Victoria. She's like a completely different person now, happier, healthier, and actually standing up for herself in ways I had never seen before. It turns out that when you remove a toxic person from your life, everyone around them starts healing and recovering too. She told me some things about their marriage that honestly made me realize how much worse my father was than I had even known. Apparently, he had been emotionally abusing her for decades as well, controlling all the money, isolating her from friends and other family members, and using the whole classic abuser playbook on her, just like he had done to me. My financial support over those 6 years had actually been enabling not just his laziness, but his systematic abuse of her as well. I had unknowingly been funding his ability to continue terrorizing both of us. I stayed because I thought that's what wives are supposed to do, she told me during one of our conversations after she moved in with us. But he was never really a husband or a father to any of us. Watching what he did to you, how he treated my son, I finally realized that wasn't love or commitment. That was just fear and habit keeping me trapped. Having my mother live with us has been absolutely incredible for everyone involved. She helps around the house, gets along fantastically with Victoria, and actually seems to enjoy life for the first time in decades. It's like watching someone come back to life after being in an emotional coma for years. My brothers are still keeping their distance from me, but I hear through the family grapevine that none of them are stepping up to help my father financially either. Funny how when the free money dried up, suddenly everyone discovered they were too busy to deal with family obligations and responsibilities. Luis apparently tried to guilt-trip Carlos into stepping up financially to support Dad, but Carlos shut that down real quick. Daniel was the one making all that money, he reportedly said. I can't afford to support Dad like he did. So much for family loyalty and sticking together through hard times, right? Oh, and the lawsuit? I won it, obviously. My father didn't even bother to show up to court. He was apparently too proud or too stubborn to defend himself against the legal consequences of his actions. The judge awarded me the full 350,000 pesos plus interest calculated at the national bank rate, plus court costs and attorney fees. The total judgment came out to about 410,000 pesos when everything was added up. Of course, trying to collect money from a man who was essentially homeless and unemployed was pretty much impossible from a practical standpoint. But that wasn't really the point of the whole legal exercise. The point was the principle behind it all, and having an official legal document that declared him a debtor who owed me money felt better than any therapy session ever could have. But the real satisfaction came from the wage garnishment order that I was able to get against him. You see, my father eventually managed to get a part-time job at some landscaping company, probably making minimum wage and hating every second of it. And I had his pathetic paycheck garnished for the judgment amount, which meant that every 2 weeks he got a very tangible reminder that his so-called failure son legally owned a piece of his income. Damn, my cousin Elena said when I told her about the wage garnishment during one of our phone conversations. You really said fuck around and find out in the most legal way possible. Uncle Roberto thought he could treat you like shit forever and never face any real consequences for his behavior. Now he's literally paying for it with every paycheck. That's some next-level petty revenge, and I'm absolutely here for it. Life was going so incredibly well that I honestly hadn't thought about my father or any of the family drama in months. Victoria and I were busy planning a vacation to Puerto Vallarta. The business was expanding faster than I could have imagined. My mother was thriving in her new environment, and everything in my world was absolutely perfect. Then yesterday my phone rang. It was an unknown number, which I normally wouldn't answer, but something made me pick it up. Daniel, it's your father. My blood ran cold when I heard his voice. I hadn't heard him speak in almost 4 years, and he sounded completely different from the man I remembered. He sounded older, weaker, and utterly defeated in ways that went beyond just financial struggle. I don't know if you've heard, but I'm sick, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Really sick. The doctors say it's cancer, and it's not looking good at all. I know we've had our differences over the years, but you're still my son, and I'd like to see you before it's too late. He paused for a moment, and then his voice got even weaker as he continued. Also, I was hoping that maybe you could stop the wage garnishment. I can barely afford my medications as it is, And having my pay docked every 2 weeks is killing me faster than the cancer. I'm literally choosing between medicine and food most weeks. For just a moment, I felt that old, familiar guilt starting to creep back into my thoughts. He's dying. He's your father. Maybe he's finally learned his lesson. Maybe this is your chance to be the bigger person. All those thoughts that would have had me rushing to his bedside a few years ago started flooding my mind. But then I remembered everything that had happened. I remembered the decades of systematic abuse, the public humiliation at family gatherings, the way he had poisoned my relationships and tried to destroy my reputation, even after I had supported him financially for years. I remembered how he had treated my mother, how he had manipulated my brothers against me, and how he had never once shown genuine remorse for any of it. The cancer revelation didn't magically change what he had done to me throughout my entire life. If anything, it highlighted how he was still trying to manipulate me and use guilt to get what he wanted, even from what he claimed was his deathbed. This was just another version of the same emotional manipulation he had been using against me for 31 years. "Dad," I said, and my voice was as steady as a rock. "I heard you the first time you said I was dead to you. Turns out you were right about something after all. And as for the wage garnishment," I continued, "that continues until every single peso is paid back with interest. A deal's a deal, and you taught me that actions have consequences." "Daniel, please," he begged, and I could hear desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm dying here. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive me? I know I wasn't perfect, but I'm your father." "You had 31 years to find it in your heart to be a decent father," I replied without any emotion in my voice. "Now you have cancer to keep you company instead of a son who actually gave a damn about you. Seems like one of us is going to die alone after all." And then I hung up the phone. Victoria found me sitting in our kitchen afterward, just staring at my phone and processing what had just happened. When I told her about the conversation, she took my hand and looked directly into my eyes. "I'm proud of you," she said with complete sincerity. "You don't owe him anything. Not your time, not your money, not your forgiveness, and certainly not your presence at his deathbed. You've already given him more than he ever deserved." She's absolutely right about that. Some people spend their entire lives waiting for toxic parents to change, to apologize, to finally become the parent they needed all along. But sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to accept that it's never going to happen, no matter how dramatic the circumstances become. My father made his choices throughout my entire childhood and adult life. He chose cruelty over kindness, abuse over love, and pride over family. Now he gets to face the consequences of those choices alone. Just like he left me alone for all those years when I desperately needed a father's support and guidance. I'm not going to his funeral when the time comes. I'm not going to pretend we had some kind of deathbed reconciliation for the sake of family peace or social expectations. I'm going to keep building my beautiful life with people who actually love and respect me for who I am. Some people might call that cold or heartless, but I call it justice. After 3 decades of psychological torture, he's finally getting exactly what he deserves.